people are logging in, let them join. I'm happy, as I said, Mr. Ramkumar Shankar, Vice President, is here. So I would request him to just give the opening words and start the program. Mr. Ramkumar.
Thank you, Saraswati, and good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Jayashree Venkatesan, Managing Trustee, Care Trust, and the participants for this sustainability series talk on Ramsar sites, the implications for resilience and climate change. For those who may not be too familiar with the history of MCCI, the Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry is one of the premier chambers of commerce in southern India and is currently into its 186th year of service to trade and industry. Established in 1836, the chamber has been an integral part of the growth of commerce and industry in the southern region. And in fact, the chamber played a major role in the establishment of the harbor at Madras, which, as we would all agree, was a turning point for the growth of industry and commerce in this part of the country. In its 175th year, the chamber, which has always been committed to sustainability, launched on 9th of November 2011, the Sustainable Chennai Forum on the occasion of the World Habitat Day celebrations. Under the auspices of this forum, we have held numerous conferences, seminars, and workshops on areas like energy, water, waste management, transport, and urban greening in the past decade. Since sustainability is a subject that requires continuous focus for creating awareness, the Chamber started this monthly Sustainability Speak series, covering a gamut of subjects under the 4 pillars of sustainability, namely human, social, economic, and environment. This is the 4th talk in this series. The topic for today is particularly relevant as new Ramsar sites have been announced recently, and Tamil Nadu has the distinction of having the highest number of Ramsar sites in India. Of the 75 declared in India so far, our state has 14 Ramsar sites, followed by Uttar Pradesh with 10. And while there is a lot of conversation and debate about climate change and climate resilience, we felt it was important to understand what these Ramsar sites mean to the entire debate around climate change. And we believe that Dr. Jayashree would be the right person to talk to us about this subject. Dr. Jayashree Venkatesan is the Managing Trustee, Care Trust. She works on issues of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecological restoration with a special interest in wetlands. She has to her credit 48 scientific publications and 1 book. Dr. Jayashree Venkatesan was awarded the Social Entrepreneur Award in 2014 for founding the Care Trust and for her contribution to the restoration and conservation of wetlands in Tamil Nadu. The Care Trust itself was awarded in 2009 India's highest award in this area, the Indira Gandhi Paryavaran Puraskar by the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change for the pioneering work on conserving Pallikarnai Marsh, the Nanmangalam Forest, and the recovery of black bucks in the IIT Madras campus. As I said, there can be no better person than Dr. Jayashree Venkatesan to talk to us about the subject for today. Over to you, Dr. Jayashree.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Good evening. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be talking to you all. MCCI is a favorite destination of all of us from Kerala, so we really enjoy being there. For the next few minutes, I will try to do justice to the topic that's been given to me, which is essentially Ramsar sites, implications for resilience and climate change. For those of you who are not very familiar with this convention, the Ramsar Convention, which was actually introduced to the world in the year 1971 in the Iranian town of Ramsar, is an intergovernmental treaty that provides the framework for the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their resources. The convention actually came into force in 1975. Almost 90% of the countries today are contracting parties or they have signed and ratified the convention. And with the convention is actually committed to 3 tenets. The first of it is something that we all often talk about, work towards wise use of all the wetlands. Second, designate suitable wetlands for the list of wetlands of international importance. When some wetland gets designated as a Ramsar site, it essentially is a wetland of international importance. And more importantly, ensure their effective management. Third, and most importantly, cooperate internationally on transboundary wetlands, shared wetland systems, and shared species. while the first two have been given a lot of importance and there's a lot of focus on it, the third, unfortunately, across the globe, receives very little attention. What is also often not said very explicitly is, while this international tag comes in after a lot of work, there is a negative tag as well in the Ramsar Convention, which is the Montreux list. The minute you're found wanting in managing the Ramsar site or the wetland of international importance very effectively, you get pushed to the Montreux list. And that's a kind of a deterrent, or it's seen as a deterrent. You would be surprised if even Chilka was once pushed into the Montreux list. The Ramsar Convention is the oldest of all the conventions that exist today globally. The conventions that deal with natural resources, with biological diversity, with ecology and environment. But more interestingly, it is the only convention that deals with a particular habitat type, while the others are more thematic and focused on subjects per se. This particular convention deals with just one habitat type, which is wetlands. In fact, initially, Ramsar Convention was seen as a convention that focused a lot on waterfowl, the aquatic birds. India, not surprisingly, is a signatory to all the international treaties that exist on natural resources, conservation of biological diversity. And more interestingly, in most cases, it's one of the first signatories of the treaties. In fact, we have to remember that even the Convention on Biological Diversity was first signed by India. India's response to most of the international treaties, and Ramsar being no exception, is through a legal enactment. It in fact launched the Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules in 2017, subsequently has been amended. But still there is a lot of debate, discussion on what exactly a wetland is. This is a question that we often encounter people asking us whether we are discussing wetlands or water bodies and what is the difference between the two. Wetlands is a very generic term, unfortunately, but there is also a merit to it because you can include almost all types of wet areas under this category. But the problem is when you actually have that as a criterion for implementation, when you really have to designate a particular area as a wetland, it goes through a lot of administrative procedures and gets bogged down. Wetlands are highly variable and dynamic. They are water bodies, but they also include land. And that is a point that's often missed. They are freshwater, brackish, saline, inland, coastal, seasonal or permanent. The seasonal or permanent is a very critical variable in this definition, primarily because most often only if there is a water body filled to its brim with water, we consider that a wetland. The others we say are waterlogged areas and give a kind of a bypass them. Natural or man-made, static or flowing. So anything that has a wet surface technically is a wetland. Ramsar Convention and the legal enactment that India has propounded, there is one particular phase which is of critical importance, which is wise use. I thought it's important that we flag this because normally, in the normal course of times, in India, any area getting protected immediately gets into this category of inviolate management. Truthfully speaking, nothing can be truly inviolate, but that's a favorite word, which essentially means keep people away from the system. But fortunately, the wetland rules do not talk about inviolate management, but instead harp or emphasize on wise use. Wise use is also a phrase that you find rather repeatedly in the Ramsar Convention. The wise use guidelines essentially say that you adopt national wetland policies involving both the existing legislation and institutional arrangements. But more importantly, develop programs of wetland inventory, monitoring, research. Essentially, it says don't freeze the system. Don't lock a system and then believe that everything is going on well. But keep it very dynamic, revisit the place, undertake a lot of research, get into an adaptive management framework, go through an iterative process, revise, and then improve upon it. And finally, it says take action at wetland sites involving the development of integrated management plans. This phrase is easier said than done because these IMPs are so complex. I recently had the pleasure, privilege, pain of drafting 2 such integrated management plans. The kind of data that these plans seek is truly mind-boggling, but the mandate of wise use is that you develop these integrated management plans, take a holistic approach at wetlands, and then do the needful. You would also notice that it emphasizes a lot on the importance of catchments. It was one of the planning errors that all of us have been responsible for, and we've been sort of caught down doing things that are not very desirable. It's primarily because we don't take the catchment into consideration. We treat water bodies as individual entities, and almost like a bowl or a bucket of water is how we handle water bodies, and that's led to a lot of problems. On the other hand, vice use stipulates that you take a kind of a catchment kind of an approach. More probably, at least in India, we talk about it as the river basin approach. The vice use guidelines also emphasize other parameters which are not very often talked about in wetland restoration. I thought it is important that I flag this primarily because at least since 2015, Tamil Nadu and Chennai in particular has witnessed a host of wetland restoration projects. What kind of guidelines determine this restoration agenda? What kind of planning goes on? What kind of scientific inputs go in? These are questions that none of us have bothered to even ask, forget answering, even ask. So I thought it's important that if you really stick to the mandate of the Ramsar Convention, you have to look at sediment and erosion control, flood control, abatement of pollution, underground supply, supply of pitch, everything pertaining to human life and livelihood has to be addressed. And we also have to address issues pertaining to habitat management. It cannot be a kind of intervention where it is devoid of the societal connotation or devoid of any scientific basis. So that is a kind of an emphasis that vice use guidelines also expect, and all Ramsar sites have to fall into this kind of understanding. How does an area get designated as a Ramsar site, wetland of international importance? It's not a simple process. In fact, it's a very, very complicated process. There are two sets of criteria called Group A and Group B. Group A has just one sub-criterion. The details can be read. Essentially, the first one talks about the habitat, and the next Group B criteria talks about species and ecological communities. The point of emphasis is, unlike in the past where it was focused totally or almost exclusively on aquatic birds, the revised criteria also include parameters such as fish and other non-avian fauna are also included. But more importantly, it's not just a presence or absence. This is a point that I wanted to flag, because very often it pains me, and maybe I'm sharing my anguish, it pains me that after a restoration program is supposedly undertaken for a wetland, we get to see the effectiveness by a metric called presence absence. This is across the board, NGOs, civil society organizations, governments, everybody does. They say, okay, before the registration, there were just 2 bird species. After the renovation or restoration, there are now 10 species. So the conclusion is the system has improved. Things are not that linear, that simple. It's far more complicated. And I think that point needs to be taken into consideration, at least when we are handling Ramsar sites in Tamil Nadu. Because we have to look at what kind of animal species at what stage in their life cycles are breeding here, what is the kind of population there, what kind of diversity of habitats does it support, and does the bird population that is found there supportive of the kind of diversity, or is it against the principles of the wetland? It's far more deeper and far more complex than what we normally associate the whole thing to. As I said, there are criteria. Criterion 7 deals with fish. Criterion 8 and 9 deal with other facts. These details are not very important. I just thought I should emphasize the point that the data that's required to fill in an application is very, very complex and comprehensive, which in a roundabout manner suggests or tells us that we need to be at a wetland for a very long time undertaking research. This application cannot be filled with 1 year's data or 2 years' data. You really need long-term data. Unfortunately, that kind of data intensity, unless there is a kind of a research organization associated with the wetland, is absent for most of the wetlands in India. And probably one of the reasons why until this year, in fact, we had such a low count of Ramsar sites in the list of wetlands of international importance. Tamil Nadu, as Mr. Shankar just now said, has 14 sites now, highest in the country. India overall commemorated its 75th year of independence by declaring 75 sites as Ramsar sites. I wish this kind of zeal was there even earlier, but now it's there. We should be happy. In Tamil Nadu, the first site that was declared was Point Caliban in 2002. 13 were added in this year. I'm very happy and in fact proud. I've been preening about it, talking to everybody about it. 10 of the 13 applications were written by my colleagues and I. So we're very happy. But these 10 applications essentially consolidates close to 15 to 18 years of our data. At least in the case of Palikarnai Marsh, it's 21 years of our data. That's the kind of data strength that's required to write these applications. And we also found that there are many other wetlands in Tamil Nadu of equal or even better significance, which could not be applied or whose candidature could not be supported by data. I don't want to name it because we're still in the process of drafting those applications. But the fact of the matter is, it's essentially data paucity that contributed to their not getting selected as Ramsar sites. Let's get into the topic of how we actually address Ramsar site from the perspective of resilience and climate change. I thought I'd pick up a case study that I'm very familiar with. I've been working here along with my teacher, Dr. Daniels, for a very, very long time. So Palikarnai Marsh. This is a marsh in South Chennai. In fact, the name Palikarnai Marsh was given by us because until we stepped in, it was known by a generic name called Kaliveli, which essentially means marsh in Tamil. And we were not very creative at that point of time because we were totally broke. And all that we had was about 32,500 rupees as funding to undertake research and advocacy on Palikarnai Marsh. So with that money, our creativity stopped at the level of naming the marsh Palikarnai Marsh because the village happened to be adjacent to the marsh. In 2001, 2002, when we actually did an assessment, we found that the marsh had already lost 90% of its habitat. So this oft-cited figure of 6,000 hectares to 600 hectares is actually a result of that study. But what is more interesting is this analysis and this output. This is something that I'm very fond of saying, was not with some refined GIS analysis or some kind of a topo analysis, but it was essentially Dr. Ranjit Daniels and I on a two-wheeler, on a moped, using the vehicle's compass, the vehicle speedometer, a compass and a handheld rope and binoculars that we estimated this by simply going around the marsh, round and round the mulberry bush kind of a scenario. We went around and we estimated, and finally that proved to be near accurate. There was an error of less than 100 meters when a geospatial analysis was done of this. So 90% loss by 2000, and all that was left was 593.64 hectares. And that is how the entire initiative of trying to protect this last remnant of the marsh began. We had unstinted support from the government, from the civil society, from media, from everyone. I mean, there was nobody who was actually opposing it. But what is very interesting is this particular area was earmarked for various projects, development projects, primarily because it was categorized as a wasteland by in the revenue records. So since it was a wasteland, it was not a water body in the strict sense of the word. It was not providing potable water to anybody. It was not a reservoir. It was not any a place with some ayakat kind of an area or irrigation service. So parcels of land were earmarked for various development projects, some of which you see them there now. So a lot of land was lost. When people talk about encroachment of Palikarnai Marsh, they should understand that less than 5% of the area is actually encroached by squatters and people from the marginalized community. Most of the encroachment has been by the privileged and the so-called development projects. And I'm certainly not against development projects, but I'm trying to emphasize the fact that such a critical area was designated as a wetland, as a wasteland, and that is why all these issues came up. The species richness of this place is very high, and that is why it was an immediate candidate to the Ramsar categorization, designation. In fact, it has a whole lot of other designations as well. It's an important bird area. It's a freshwater, prioritized freshwater habitat. This is a potential candidate for biodiversity heritage site and all that. When we began our work in 2000, we recorded, I'm just giving an example, 106 species of birds. Today in 2022, it's jumped to 178. Maybe because of sampling issues, we were not very well equipped then, or it may just be that it's become a much more conducive place for the birds. We are not concluding anything, but across all groups, flora and fauna, there is an increase in species richness, except for one or two birds that are normally known to occur in Tamil Nadu. All other birds are found in this particular marsh. And what is very interesting, if you actually probe a bit deeper, is the fact that this is the only wetland, which is not a typical irrigation tank or stuff like that, along the east coast where there is no fishing or agriculture pressure. You really take from Sundarbans to Point Calumet, every other site has these pressures. Palikarnai is an exception. It does not have either a fishing pressure or a agriculture pressure, maybe because it's within a metropolitan city.
And very interestingly, Palikanai Marsh is also part of the Central Asian Flyway. Now, one may wonder why I'm speaking about the Central Asian Flyway when all that I had to do was to talk about climate change and resilience. I'm trying to, in a very roundabout manner, emphasize the fact that birds are much smarter than us. They seem to know that this is a favored destination, this is a safe destination, it's a destination of very critical importance. Now, how does it actually contribute to impact the city's resilience? Now, one of the things that the Chennai city has been really paranoid about, I'm using the word paranoid with the full understanding of what the word means, has been the issue of floods, especially since 2015, which was characterized as mega floods. Now, I'm not taking away any kind of value or an attribute from that particular statement, but it is rather unusual because Chennai has always experienced flooding, waterlogging, issues of inundation. Historically, at least 200 years of data shows that it's been a very decadal feature. Every decade you had these flooding episodes, waterlogging episodes, but they've become very intense post 2005. If you really look at the precipitation data for the last 200 years, you will find that it more or less stayed consistent. Right? But more surprising is the fact that Chennai is not a low rainfall area. It receives an annual average rainfall of 1,248 mm. This is last 200 years of data until 2002. But since 2002, I mean, there are no studies supportive of this, but since 2002, what we witness are what are called these intense rain. 2002, the second one happened in 2005, and subsequently the frequency has actually reduced. You get it almost on a kind of an erratic manner where the entire season's rainfall pours down in one particular day. And this has led to a reduced interval of flooding. In fact, in 2005, when we were looking at flood assessment, we did a flood assessment study of South Chennai. We had said that the next flood would be in 2015. We were very happy that it happened as a researcher, not as a commoner. But then we were also very sure that the next interval would not be a decadal interval. And that also came true. And much of this is primarily because the Palikanai Marsh, which essentially drained, at least in South Chennai, 234 square kilometers, has been severely compromised. The flooding intensity and the kind of low resilience that the city experiences in South Chennai is primarily because of mismanagement of Palikanai Marsh. So what is exactly the role of Palikanai Marsh? It drains over 65 wetlands. Now, some of you who've been tracking our work would notice that this number of 65 has essentially jumped from 34 to 65, which is not natural because the watershed area remains consistent at 234 square kilometers. Then how could the number jump? It's primarily because a lot of re-engineering work under the pretext guise of flood control, flood management, flood mitigation has been happening. So you have wetlands being connected in an extremely complex manner. There is no wetland or no river course in Chennai city which has not been manipulated or connected to another system. And I mean, there may be a lot of engineering yarn that's gone in, but we have no idea about it. But the system which was ill-equipped to handle even 34 wetlands now has to drain close to 65 wetlands. Imagine the amount of water that comes in. Far more critical is the fact that in this particular area, at least, the wetlands were not designed to hold water. They were more designed to function as entities that would enable sheet flow of water. That is why agriculture in this area thrived a lot on using the sheet flow, the seasonal sheet flow of water. These are all lowlands. These are all areas where bananas and paddy used to be cultivated. So sheet flow was a beneficial ecosystem service historically. Now it's seen as waterlogging. Primarily, this kind of a facility is now being engineered to support or to facilitate the drainage of 65 wetlands west to east. Also, the fact that Palikanai Marsh is a system that receives water from multiple directions. It's not west to east as Chennai is always popularly showcased to be. It's also south to north, it's west to east, it's southwest to northeast. Water comes in from all directions. And this is the place that actually soaks up the water as a sponge. Marshes are sponges, and then slowly drains it into the sea through the Ogium Madu, which is a small channel, and the Buckingham Canal and the sand dunes there. Now, what we are actually trying to do is to flush the entire water into the sea, which, as anybody would know, or most people would know, is a deterrent or is a disservice to the local ecology as well as the hydrological systems there. What Palikanai Marsh essentially functions as, even the small 720 hectares that we have, in addition to the 2 patches of reserve forest and the national park that buffer it, the Nanmangalam Reserve Forest as well as the Madambakam Reserve Forest and the Giddi National Park. They're essentially functioning as the blue-green infrastructure, the buffers. What normally gets designated as an eco-sensitive zone. In metropolitan cities, unfortunately, these get designated as 0 kilometers, but the natural system provides the buffers. Essentially, the Ramsar sites are buffers, especially in metropolitan cities, and they need to be managed as buffers. The wise use and the integrated management plan that we develop cannot be the standardized format as you would normally find in a rural area. These need to be tailored to urban areas, to metropolitan cities. And that is how these would function as buffers. They essentially are shock absorbers. South Chennai, to a large extent, gets protected by all the semi-natural natural systems that are still there. And that is how the Ramsar site of Palikanai Marsh would also function. So would Gulf of Mannar, so would many of these. I mean, there are one or two of them, I don't want to name them, which are more symbolic in their importance because they're more species rich rather than providing an ecosystem service. But many of the others, especially Suchindram Teru, Gulf of Mannar, all these which are being protected are essentially shock absorbers. Some are shock absorbers for the coastal influence, some for the inland influence. But all of them are buffer areas. In Palikanai Marsh, the lesser known attribute of it, it's also an excellent area for groundwater recharge. This is also the kind of contribution that it makes to resilience. In fact, if you really look at the ecosystem services that the marsh provides, the tangible and the intangible, and the direct, indirect, the list is quite exhaustive, but very undervalued because people still talk about the marsh as a wasteland. Hopefully, the Ramsar designation will be able to change that. And on that note, I will stop. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you so very much. Now the floor is open for questions. People can either unmute or you can raise your hand and we can probably unmute you if you require help. Jaya, you can help?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if I may ask a question, this is regarding Palikanai Marsh itself. You said that most of that marsh has actually been taken over for various uses, and we see that most of that place is used as a giant dumping ground for waste. Isn't there some kind of if the government is so aware of the importance of this wetland, what do you think is likely to be done about that dumping ground there?
Yes, sir. Government is extremely aware, but still not being able to do anything, primarily because they're approaching solid waste as a program which needs to have a landfill. So till you look around for a landfill, which you know is not possible in a metropolitan city, 80-90 kilometers radius of Chennai, I don't think land is available for you to get into a landfill mode of managing. But unfortunately, sir, this particular dump yard, which is now close to about 100 hectares, a little over 100 hectares, I don't remember the exact figure, has been created in such a manner that for every couple of layers of solid waste, they've used construction debris for compaction. So it's almost like a kind of a sandwich of construction debris and solid waste. So even if you dredge the place up or you do this biomining or whatever it is, the chances of it reverting back to being a marsh is virtually nil. It can at best be a green zone. That's about it. But solutions are not going to come in very easily, primarily because the approach is still landfill based. Have I answered your question, sir?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in fact, I was about to ask the same question because I live close to the Palikanai Marsh. So I'm extremely thankful to you, Jayashree, on a personal front. But as Ramkumar was saying, I mean, it's a bit of a paradox to have a Ramsar sites and the dumping ground, dumping yard so close by. So could that also have affected or delayed the process of probably, or at least created hassles for probably getting it as a Ramsar site in any way?
Really, not really, ma'am. Not really.
Okay.
One of the things that the marsh has been exhibiting, as I said, has been a consistent increase in the number of species that you find there. That alone would sail the application through. But what I would personally feel is use the Ramsar designation as a leverage to handle the garbage dump. That is how I would like to approach the whole thing. Otherwise, it gets pushed into a negative list. So that sword is hanging over our heads. So getting the Ramsar designation is easier, ma'am, in comparison to sustaining it through a proper integrated management plan. That is the difficult part.
So how long does this valid actually? Is there any sort of a time limit?
No, it's correct.
Okay. Ms. Maithili has a question to ask.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Mcci, and I, as a student of who has been studying Pallikaranai and who has met you many times, it's a very exciting thing to know that this Ramsar recognition has happened, and we were always thinking that it's something unachievable for Tamil Nadu or for Chennai, and this seems like some kind of a promise. What are its practical implications for the residents, or for the community, or for what will the government undertake? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. See, one of the things that the Ramsar designation will ensure is no diversion of any wetland area to non-wetland use. So whatever is now being designated as a Ramsar site will remain a wetland. You cannot sort of divert it to create a road or a bridge or stuff like that. That's gone. The second thing is it will have some curbs on movement. For example, within the marsh, if at all there is some movement, some dumping of garbage or letting out of sewage, all these will be stopped. But positive things would be that it will become a place, a kind of a nature reserve. That's something, in fact, for those residents who are living around the marsh, on the periphery of the marsh, it's a big boom, because a lot of initiatives will be taken to make sure that the public nature interface is strengthened. So that's a positive that you can actually look forward to.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
But on a related note, one of the things that I've been trying to talk about with very little success is the kind of, since you're an architect, the kind of design sensitivity that needs to come about in areas that are designated as Ramsar site. These glass facades that are detrimental to birds and other fauna, the kind of designs that you have which attract certain species of birds or certain fauna, all these need to be reworked. There is an opportunity for a design that's sensitive to nature, to Ramsar site. That's something that you could consider thinking about working on.
Thank
you. I think Jaya, sorry, Hema, you want to ask something? Hema?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, fantastic, because I'm very new to this area. So it was a lot of understanding of this wetlands. I was asking a very basic question, as a common person, common man, what can we do, to restore these wetlands? Because it's such a sight to see, these birds coming back and all that. And I think I just wanted to get some perspectives of how we could educate our children, grandchildren on this, and how can we, build a sustainable ecosystem? Because we know for a fact that Chennai or Tamil Nadu or even Karnataka, Bangalore, they had so many such wetlands, which is all right now, built with buildings and all that. So is there anything that we can do to kind of restore it, to be able to contribute, volunteer? I just wanted to ask these questions.
You asked the most complex question, because it's a question.
Sorry.
The answer. No, I enjoy answering this question, so that's fine. We can do a whole lot of things, ma'am, as regards walks and stuff like that, where basic level awareness, sensitivity is brought about among stakeholders. We regularly conduct, and so do many other organizations, equal number of good organizations. In fact, that's one thing about Pallikaranai Marsh that I always celebrate. The number of people, because when we started working on this, I was at least advised not to take it up because I was at the beginning of my career. I was told to pick up something more charismatic, which will take me places. But still, it was a big success. So any of these organizations organizing walks, nature journals and stuff like that, journaling and stuff like that, we could actually, you can take part in that. But at an institutional level, where that's something not very well known, Pallikaranai Marsh can be celebrated for the fact that it has the smallest ever range designated, which is normally something that the forest department would not do. But given the importance of the Pallikaranai Marsh, the range has been designated as an exclusive range, and there's a full-fledged team manning the whole process. And this has also established what is called the Conservation Authority for Pallikaranai Marsh, which is a two-tier system. The governing structure, the governance committee or governing committee, I don't remember the exact word, consists of all the government officials. But then there is an executive committee where resident welfare organizations, NGOs, academic institutions, corporates, everybody can become a partner, a member, and then guide the whole process. Because we also have to contribute in a manner where, ideas come. Funds are not a problem, because Pallikaranai Marsh attracts funds big time. In fact, we wrote the GCF application to the Green Climate Fund, and it's the only application from Tamil Nadu that's been considered. So funds are not an issue. Yeah, funds are not an issue. What is an issue or a bigger lacuna is the fact that you need ideas, innovative ideas, ideas that come from experiences elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world. So that is possible. And this particular authority, its member secretary is the District Forest Officer, Chennai. She functions out of the DMS building in Tenapet. So you could meet her, and more formal engagement could be done that way. Otherwise, of course, there are so many walks. There is an interpretation center. There's a beautiful walkway. All these could be explored. It's an open place. And recently, they also established an eco park, which is also quite interesting. But it's going to take a lot of time for awareness to build in. And in fact, we recently brought out a book called Home of the Blue Lily. Essentially, the blue lily is neither, which is typical nominate flower for coastal Chennai, coastal Tamil Nadu. So that book is also available. It talks about all that I said in a very illustrated manner. So such things, many organizations are doing it, and we partner with them.
I think, Jayashree, one point is that we should, like what you're doing for nature walks or whatever is it, right? Field visits. I think that this awareness should be starting with school children right from their class 3, 4 onwards.
Yes,
I think this will be, because that will then really make them, this will be a lasting impression set in their minds very early. And the ounce of perception needs tons of education, and we better educate early on, and the perception can completely be changed, So I think that we should take it up, I think chamber should take it up and then do it in some format, because it's such a, very quietly good work has been done. And I think this all should be, it should be reaching common person. Nobody knows about it,
That is true, ma'am, and that's also deliberate. We keep it low profile, primarily because we work a lot in spheres that are not very attractive. So we don't want to talk about it until we are very sure about the work.
No, I think particularly for children, school children, even a small amount of ounce of some, dose that you give them, I think it will be fantastic. Actually, is this a suggestion? And we can volunteers can sign up and then go and just talk about it, what is happening and all that to children, just for spreading the awareness, and thereby, because if you go to countries like US, Australia, even Singapore and all that, the way that people take pride of their environment is something that's not there in our country.
Yeah, very true. Especially Tamil Nadu. Yeah,
absolutely. We take things for granted, and that should change. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, just to kindle your thoughts, right? Picking up from what Mr. Ramkumar Shankar was telling.
Yes, sir.
Many of those things are being used as a garbage dumping area. Now, the worst thing has happened during the last 2.5 years when the COVID onset was there. All the medicines, wastages, and other things arising out of that virus are being dumped in the same place.
Yes, sir.
There is no care has been taken at all, knowing the seriousness of it. Now, what happens is, over a period of time, it gets submerged into the soil, and when it rains, it all the more worst. It goes deep into the soil. When it goes deep into the soil, everything gets polluted. Even the groundwater that goes down when we pump it out. No, we are getting only the polluted water, not the real water which can be potable. Now, are there any serious thought process that has gone in? Point number one. Point number two, we are talking, we want industrial growth, and we're welcoming with all the 4, 5, 6 hands available. But at the same time, with the industrial growth, the need of water also increases. And with that, coupled with that also, in the, the buildings are also coming up for the inmates of those industrial persons who are going to work there to reside. Everyone is building 14 floors, 16 floors, 18 floors. From I don't know from where they are going to get the water. Water being pumped by the industry, water is pumped by the flats that are being there, 18, 16 floors and all, right from the ground. But where is the water? Over a period of time, when this water table is going to come down, there is a danger that the building will go down. One fine morning, ground floor will be missing. It will go under the soil. So what is the action that we are planning to take on this?
So the fact that fresh water is an extremely limited resource is something that we fail to recognize across the board. We assume that it's an infinite resource and that we plan accordingly. and we cannot really fault any sector or any group about this. All of us are equally culpable. That's the first statement that I would make. Second, whatever water we have is so polluted that it's unfit for any purpose. Third, there's too much wastage of water. Too much wastage of water. As a citizen, we should be extremely careful about how the water needs to be used. But on the contrary, we waste a lot. And fourth, the fact that it's limited, the fact that we need to, as you very rightly pointed out, focus a lot on it is missing even amongst communities. Well, I wouldn't like to name the site. We've been over the last 4 years trying to revive a wetland, which receives something close to 8 MLD of sewage and grey water every day. In fact, if you see the wetland, it will be full of water and people would assume it's clean water, but it's only grey water or sewage, 7 to 8 MLD. We're trying to work a nature-based solution for addressing this, primarily because much of the sewage that comes in is through informal settlements. You don't have a dedicated point discharge of sewage. There is local opposition. People don't want it. They're saying we'd rather live in the midst of sewage or grey water. We are fully aware of it, but we don't want anything like this. Why don't you want anything like this? We want only pipe kind of a sewage system. We don't want anything that's green, that's low intensity, that's non-contractual. So this is how the society still reacts to all these issues. Till that gets changed, I think we have to really wait it out. We'll have to really wait it out at least for the next 10 to 20 years before things change. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but this is primarily the issue when it comes to water.
Yeah, I do understand, but only thing is I'm a little bit concerned about our grandchildren, others. Will they see ever a water?
The quality of life has been dipping rather rapidly, and we are responsible for it. But unless we act, things are not going to change. Only we can act. As top predators, I think only human beings can act. I'm very fond of saying one thing. Of all the organisms that are found on this planet, the only species that can generate waste to the detriment of other species is humans. No other species. I'm sorry to be saying that, but that's the truth.
Any others? No other questions? I just want to understand, Jayashree, these Ramsar sites and so many we're leading and all, would that also be used as a promoting tourism in the state, or would it be detrimental to the thing? Would it be counterproductive?
Counterproductive, ma'am, because Tamil Nadu has a very strong ecotourism policy. It's a very well drafted policy. As long as the tourism is non-intrusive, there is no problem. Point Calimere has always had tourism, very low intensity tourism, but it doesn't affect. In fact, when it comes to wetlands, we can say that more active participation of people will only benefit the wetland, the positive kind of interaction. Kundankulam, which is one of the Ramsar sites, is a standing example of that. The local villagers are so supportive of the birds that come there. And there are, people say that even Diwali is not celebrated with a lot of crackers and all that, primarily because people feel the birds would get disturbed. It coincides with the bird migration season. So people don't burst crackers. And they don't complain if their birds come and sit on their roofs and defecate and there are stains and all that. People don't do that. In many places, in Vaduvur, we saw that. Next to the temple, there's this beautiful Vaduvur bird sanctuary, which is now a Ramsar site. People are extremely happy about the birds coming and grazing in their agricultural fields. In fact, they're very upset when they don't come. So as long as such positive interactions are reinforced, I don't think tourism will be a problem. People have to experience, ma'am. Otherwise, it's all in books and stuff like that. They can't relate to it anymore.
Any other thing, or should we? Any final questions from anybody? Okay. Dr. Jayashree, it's indeed a very, very brilliant talk, because honestly, people like me are totally ignorant of this, and we wanted to really understand what this means. And as Ramkumar Shankar said, we couldn't have got a better person to talk about it in such a short time with so much clarity, because you have, as you say, you have probably walked the talk all through your life, because I know how she was passionate. In fact, Ramkumar, I should say, she's a great supporter, great mentor for our Sustainable Chennai Forum. We turn to her for any help in this. And she had been really a great support. And as I said, I'm personally thankful to her because I live close to Pallikaranai. So I have probably experienced at least the okay. So, Mr. Balaji, you want to have a question? Ask a question?
Yeah. Yes, madam.
Oh, please, please.
In fact, it was quite a very precise presentation. See, we had been invited to attend this presentation through our company from Chennai. Like we are from Pari Agro Industries Limited, part of Murugappa Group from Chennai. We just wanted to understand, see, we have tea operations spread out in Valparai, that is Pollachi area, and also in Nilgiris. I am not sure whether these here, this is all mostly forest which comes under Tiger Reserve, and we have our tea plantations here. As a company, like as we are a company where we do a lot of work for sustainability and conservation, I would like to understand whether do we have anything to do in this particular for wetlands over here?
Certainly, sir. You have a lot to do, and you are leaders, in fact, when it comes to supporting conservation. I'm aware of the work that you've been doing in Valparai, at least for many, many years, and I visited your farms there, tea estates there. In fact, we reported a large presence of amphibians in your estate as compared to the other estates. So you have that kind of a legacy, and there's a lot that can be done for wetland conservation. A number of organizations that are actually doing the groundwork across all these 14 Ramsar sites. You could support them, sir. Certainly a lot of support is required.
Like, can you just help us out of, if anything, that we could specifically embark upon and proceed?
Sure, sir. Sure. I can
Because
send you
our
a
company
table.
is all the more willing to do more work on this. And we also have tied up with the Nature Conservation of Forest who works,
Yes.
who are devotedly working on this particular thing. Yes. So
yeah, we're all the same group, so we're all people in the same network.
okay.
I could do one thing. I'll get your contacts from Madam Saraswati and send you a table as to what the issues are for each of these 14 Ramsar sites. Then you could possibly decide on what needs to be done.
Okay, madam. Yeah, thank you.
Within the next 2 days, I will do that.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Sir.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Vijay Kumar, you want to ask anything? I see you have unmuted. Or no, you have unmuted. You are not unmuted. You are muted.
Okay. Jayashree, thanks very much for this lovely presentation. And of course, I can always call up Jayashree anytime I want and ask her. We talk about a lot of things. So yeah, I won't take up her time now here, but absolutely with Jayashree, I know she's a phone call away.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for that.
So, if there are no further questions, probably we will come to the close of the thing. Again, I would like to thank her profusely. Thanks so much. It's indeed really amazing to see how what is categorized as wasteland has become wetland and has got become the Ramsar site also. That is, I would attribute a lot of that credit to you, definitely, and anyone who had been observing this would definitely give that credit to you. So all the very best, and Ms. Hema suggested what probably how we can catch people young and create this thing. The chamber also has a plan under its Sustainable Chennai Forum. So thanks, Ms. Hema. We will see how best to take that, and it's really very passionately explained the criteria for wetlands, probably 10 commandments or 9 commandments, the criteria for this Ramsar site, and how probably Tamil Nadu could score. Probably now, as you rightly said, achieving is one thing, sustainability is the other most important thing. So we would probably work together to do whatever best from the chamber through our members, and we would stay in touch with you. Thank you so much. And thanks, Mr. Ramkumar Shankar, all our committee members and all the participants who are here. Stay in touch with us. Every last Friday, we have started this talk. So you can await the next session, last Friday of the next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Bye.